From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
And thanks as usual, Ollie. It is Wednesday, October 23rd, 2019. My name is Richie Allen. It's been a lovely old day, but a cold day in Salford and Greater Manchester. But I'm in good form. A little bit under the weather, but I'm not going to let that get in the way. As usual, I've got two fascinating guests lined up for your Richie Allen Show. Tweet the programme right now if you'd like to chat with me during the programme. I'm sure you know the Twitter handle already, so you do. Let's get on with the programme.
You junkies bastards, yeah. You junkies bastards, yeah.
It's the Richie Allen Show. Broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Now, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, or the EHRC, has alleged today that 29% of black students have been racially harassed at universities in the UK. It's quite extraordinary that, because it's nearly 1 in 3. It's a wide-ranging study that we'll get into with the academic and author Stuart Waiton. Stuart, of course, is at Abertay University in Dundee. Lovely bloke, very smart guy, and he's very interested in these matters. So we'll get into that with Stuart. And maybe we'll chat about football racism as well a little bit later on this hour. And coming up in the second hour, the lady who's got the oldest podcast on the internet, that is a fact. The brilliant Meria Heller joins us live from Arizona, where we'll talk all things US politics, Tulsi Gabbard, Hillary Clinton, I did say Hillary, and much more. Meria Heller, Meria.net, joins the programme in the second hour. Yes, indeed. Got the old lurgy. I mentioned it this morning. I've been taking a lot of soft, juicy drinks and a bit of this and a bit of that, a bit of honey and a bit of this. And but I can feel the old voice starting to go. But anyway, there's a lot of people worse off than me. You know, head colds, you know what they're like. They're not painful as much as really annoying, and they drain the bloody life out of you, don't they? But anyway, look, let's get into some important stories. You'll have heard this afternoon. It's a rotten and a wretched thing to have happened. But 39 people were found in a lorry container in Essex, found dead in the back of a lorry container. It's believed that the lorry travelled from Bulgaria, and it was found in the small hours of this morning at Waterglade Industrial Park in Grays, and that's according to police there. They've named in the last short while a 25-year-old man from Northern Ireland as the driver. He was arrested on suspicion of murder. Apparently the vehicle entered the UK via Holyhead, Anglesey on Saturday. It apparently came from Ireland. That's what they're saying anyway. It's rotten. It really is. They just named the driver at least, well, about 40 minutes or thereabouts ago. And his name, well, you'll hear Martin Brunt here from Sky News UK. This is Martin Brunt.
Yes, not named officially, I should point out, but we understand that it's a man called Mo Robinson, who's 25 years old. Lives near the Portadown area in Northern Ireland. Police have said only that their suspect is a 25-year-old man from Portadown, from Northern Ireland, who was the lorry driver. On Mr. Robinson's Facebook page, there are images of a red cab unit that appears to match the cab unit that's attached to the trailer in the industrial park in Grays, where the 39 bodies were found this morning. And on his Facebook page, Mo Robinson describes his occupation as lorry driver. There are a number of other cabs that are pictured on his website, on his Facebook page. But most recently, there are images that look remarkably like the cab that has been seized by police, that is the subject of that murder investigation now. But I should point out that neither Essex Police or the National Crime Agency have confirmed that name to us. Another development, and I think we're going to get more details of this shortly from the Deputy Chief Constable of Essex, it now appears that The cab unit we're talking about was driven from Holyhead in North Wales to Essex sometime over the past few days. But this morning at about 12:30, 30 minutes after midnight this morning, it's believed that cab unit picked up the trailer at Purfleet near Tilbury Docks. That trailer unit, where the bodies were discovered a little bit later, had travelled to the UK from Zeebrugge to Purfleet, was docked there this morning, and shortly after its arrival, the cab picked it up and then drove it a very short distance to the industrial park at Grays. Now, it arrived there, we think, at about 1:10 this morning, and it was 30 minutes later that the ambulance authorities were alerted, and they alerted police, and then the huge murder operation began with the discovery of those 39 bodies. So more details emerging that paints a clearer picture of the journey that the cab and the trailer unit took to that park this morning where those bodies were discovered.
It's horrendous. It's unimaginable to be in that situation for several days, and you wonder how, in the name of God, could they all die? Wouldn't they have died at different times? Wouldn't they have kicked the granny out of the sides of the lorry and made all the noise in the world? And I was thinking that, but then maybe the driver had left the cab at that stage, maybe a terrible thing. So they weren't Bulgarians. Bulgaria is a member of the European Union. It's believed that they might have originated in the Middle East, many of these people. What's going on? How does it happen? Well, a guy called Chris Hobbs spoke with Sky News earlier. He's a Metropolitan Police detective, and he has specialised in this field. It is a shocking number, he says, 39 people dead.
It's huge. It is huge. I mean, we had something in 2000, another incident when there was more than 50 people discovered in a lorry, but it's been obviously a long gap since then. This number is colossal. It's very worrying, but it is something that the National Crime Agency have warned about previously. They have said that people are risking their lives, and the traffickers, as things become more difficult for them, become ever more desperate but determined to get people through, assuming, of course, these are victims, as it were, of traffickers. So it's not altogether a surprise. The numbers are possibly a surprise, but the risks that some of the migrants undertake to try and get here are considerable, but they have been known, and as I say, the National Crime Agency have been very vociferous in warning that we could get tragedies like this, but probably not on this scale.
It was interesting. I was speaking to the MP for Thurrock a little earlier this hour, and she said she wasn't too sure of the scale of the problem in Thurrock. Obviously, it's vulnerable to this kind of thing because of the ports that they have, but it's not until a tragic circumstance like this happens that you are aware of the problem, if you see what I mean. It is, by its very nature, under the radar.
It is very much under the radar, but in terms of the east of the country, again, you've got the Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration warning that our east coast is very vulnerable to traffickers and smugglers of all types, be it drugs, be it people or whatever. So we do seem to have an all-round vulnerability, apart from probably the channel ports. And of course, as the channel ports become more difficult to navigate for the people traffickers and for the migrants themselves, then other weak spots will be looked for and found. And this is what's happening at the moment.
Yeah, Chris Hobbs, detective specialising in this field. He then talks about the vulnerability in general of the UK and Ireland in dealing with this and in preventing this type of thing from happening.
Well, again, if you look at the Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration, he will say no. Last year he was very critical of Poole and Portsmouth that also take these ferries from Cherbourg and Roscoff. He was saying they were vulnerable. They didn't have enough staff. They didn't have enough equipment. The staff there were working very hard, but there simply weren't enough of them. And as I said, there's been concerns as well about vulnerability going through the Republic of Ireland and people finding that as a weak spot. Now, the Republic of Ireland do have border controls, immigration controls, and they have discovered migrants trying to get to the UK through Ireland. They've actually been discovered in lorries and so on in Ireland. But it's just the sheer vastness of the routes and the vastness of the sheer number of people trafficking criminal organisations that are all involved in this really terrible business.
Yeah, mafia-type organisations and gangsters, wherever there is a desire on behalf of people for something, whether it be drugs, whether it be cigarettes, whether it be alcohol, whether it be prostitutes, or whether it be safe passage across borders, gangsters will always be there. You know, absent from the discussions today, of course, is who these people are and why they are desperately keen to get into Europe and into the United Kingdom. The massive death and destruction in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, wrought, and I say wrought on that country, the havoc wreaked on those countries, I should say, by the intelligence agencies of our countries. The deliberate destabilisation plan for the Middle East, the deliberate destruction of infrastructure, the deliberate mass murder of millions of people. No discussion of it. No wonder they tried to get in, God love them. And on immigration as a subject and its importance to people in the UK, particularly around Brexit, there was a very interesting article in the Telegraph newspaper this morning, and I did mention it on the newspaper review programme that we do on YouTube. Philip Johnston wrote it in the Telegraph. It's called "Blair's Reckless Population Explosion Sowed the Seeds of Brexit, Though Few Will Now Admit It." And I'll read you just a little bit of it. He writes, "The greatest failure of modern British governance was to encourage mass immigration to the UK and fail to prepare for the impact it would have. It is at the root of much that afflicts the nation today, from the agony of Brexit to the near-terminal pressure on the NHS and the housing crisis with all its attendant consequences. As figures from the Office for National Statistics confirmed this week, the last 20 years have seen the population rise faster than at any time in history." Now, this article went to bed and was published before the horrible news about 39 illegal immigrants dying in a lorry this morning. And you might say, what's the relationship? Well, Sky News wanted to talk this morning about immigration and about the importance of immigration to people. And this article, of course, once this article was published last night, it had, you know, the sort of reaction you would expect to an article like that. The author being accused of, in some quarters, race baiting, of xenophobia. We'll come to that in a minute. But it's a very, very, very thought-provoking article, very well written, about what unfettered migration to the country has done for people's standards of living and their employment prospects. It's an excellent article, and it's worth a read if you can read it. Okay? And he talks about political discourse. He talks about the demonisation of people who are concerned about the arrival of economic migrants on the one hand, or asylum-seeking migrants on the other hand, the impact it has on communities and, again, the standards of living for people there. So it's a good article by Philip Johnston, regardless of where you stand on the issue. So they wanted to debate this on Sky News this morning. They got two people, a woman called Ash Sakar, she works for Novara Media, and a writer called Benedict Spence. Adam Bolton was the host. Interesting take by these people. Here's Novara Media's Ash Sakar. They're talking about Philip Johnston's article. Have a listen.
I mean, reading through his column, he seems to get a lot of things confused and mixed up. So on the one hand, he says that the population boom caused by immigration has, it's provided a huge set of problems, in particular strain on public services. But on the other hand, he starts talking about the problem of our ageing population and the strain that puts on public services, in particular social care and hospitals. One of the things that I would say is that the minute you start putting all the blame at immigrants' doors, you start losing sight of what's actually driving these issues. So if you've got a problem with underfunded public services, rather than making life more miserable for immigrants, why not just fund those public services? If you're struggling to have an adequately staffed social care service, well, Why not encourage immigration to staff that social care service? When I talk to people who've got concerns about immigration, it tends to fall into two halves. One is people who are worried about scarcity in housing, in jobs, in school places. And then when you start suggesting, well, maybe it's possible to have all those things while still making the country a nice place for immigrants to come, then you start bringing people on board. It's only those groups of people who start, really those concerns are a fig leaf for anxieties around culture, people who simply don't like foreigners, don't like what they do to the country. Well, I don't think that we should entertain those views or treat them as legitimate.
You heard that?
Anxieties around culture, people who simply don't like foreigners, don't like what they do to the country. Well, I don't think that we should entertain those views or treat them as legitimate.
You've now got people telling you on national news programmes which views are legitimate and which views are not legitimate. Of course, the presenter should jump in there and say, listen, you don't get to decide which views are legitimate or not. We'll debate any view, we'll discuss any view. You don't get to say which view is okay to discuss and which view isn't okay to discuss. But of course he didn't. What about Benedict Spence, the writer? Of course he agrees, of course. You're not going to get any real discussion on Sky News, but anyway.
I agree. I don't actually think that the column is necessarily very helpful in that it does raise, first and foremost, the spectre of immigration as an issue, whereas actually the issue is one of simple preparedness.
No, the issue is immigration for people. It's clear, it's obvious, it's apparent to even the dumbest MF on planet Earth that pre-Brexit referendum, post the referendum, the issue that concerns people more than any other is immigration. And it is a flat-out lie to say that it isn't.
My view is very much that Brexit and a lot of what's happening at the moment is down to the fact that as a country we have not been very good at preparing for eventualities and actually looking too far ahead into the future, of which immigration is only one issue. But, what's been happening in the last few weeks, I think, is as good an example of any, that actually across the board we're not very good. You can look to the cause and effect of cuts on, say, the Ministry of Justice, and then the knock-on effect to policing issues and miscarriages of justice further down the line. That actually is the issue of our times, is that we live in a culture of almost doing things on the hoof, so to speak. Immigration is one of those issues, but to just say that is the key thing, that people are angry about immigration, no, I think people are...
It's the tipping point. If you're underfunding the police, if you're underfunding the NHS, if you're underfunding social care, if you're underfunding benefits, social welfare, obviously then when the floodgates open up, and some people won't like that term, but when countries join the European Union and those countries would have not so cool working conditions and lower wages, those people are going to naturally come to countries like the UK, and that then is going to put a massive, massive pressure on those public services that have been deliberately underfunded anyway. How stupid do you have to be not to see that? Immigration is not just one of those things. It's the tipping point. Because Josephine and Joseph Smith are working every hour God sends and are barely able to make ends meet. So they don't know the finer details about the underfunding of public services. They just see, when they go to their local NHS surgery or when they go somewhere else, they just see, people in their towns with Eastern European accents, Ukrainian, Polish, and so on, Romanian, and they're like, what the hell, where did they come from? And you write it off as xenophobia, as Little Englanderism or racism, when it's not true.
People are angry or dismayed at just the slightly too laid back, too lazy.
Right, he's a muppet, so let's just move on from him. Benedict Spence, nothing to contribute. A genius at saying lots but saying nothing at all. There is no doubt, it is ridiculous to say otherwise, is that immigration concerns dominated the Brexit debate, people's reasons for voting, and continue to dominate that debate today. More from Novara Media's Ash Sakar, or Sakar, I don't know how you pronounce it.
I mean, one of the things that he talks about in the column itself is that the population boom, which he identifies as problematic, is also driven by the children of immigrants, right? I'm a child of immigrants. I also happen to be British. So why is this distinction?
She's being disingenuous there. He said the total number, hitting 70 million within the next decade, the population, is fueled predominantly by immigration, either directly or by the children of recent arrivals. This young woman is not the child of a recent arrival. Her parents arrived 30 or 40 years ago. So she's telling porcupines and fibs there. Okay? Recent arrivals, he said in his article.
Distinction about who my parents and my grandparents are suddenly meaningful.
Me, I'm offended.
And suddenly scary. So I think that there's a lot of slippage in here. I would put it down to carelessness if I was feeling charitable. I'd put it down to xenophobia if I wasn't quite feeling so charitable.
Yeah, it's a coward's way of calling the author of the article a racist when he isn't. The points raised by Philip Johnston in the article are excellent. And they are very moderate, and they are framed in a way that clearly shows that he's trying to see it from both sides. It's a brilliant piece of writing. It's not xenophobic. Then she volunteers her solution to the horrors of 39 people dying in the back of a lorry.
I actually think that they can do stuff about things like the container lorry. You can make family reunification easier. You can open up legal and legitimate means of migration to this country. Because we talk about the effect of migration in depressing wages. Well, the thing that has the most effect on depressing wages is if you create a hyper-precarious class of worker who's scared of this.
A hyper-precarious class of worker. Now, this is the sort of horse manure. This is pure genius. This is the sort of bullshit I would expect from a 45-year career politician and not from a young journalist. This is wonderful bullshit, this.
You create a hyper-precarious class of worker who's scared of the state, who's scared of the law and has to accept the worst conditions possible. It's no one's first choice to come here in the back of the lorry.
It's no one's first choice to come here in the back of the lorry. Listen to what she says at the very beginning of this again.
I actually think that they can do stuff about things like the container lorry. You can make family reunification easier. You can open up legal and legitimate means of migration to this country.
Ah!
What kind of fuckery is this?
Yeah, they just don't want to listen, you see. They don't want to listen. If you're asking questions about the impact of migration in your community, in your towns, you're a xenophobe. If you say migration is a good thing, multiculturalism is brilliant, it's great for us all, you're okay, Jack, you're fine. You get to speak, and your opinions are legitimate. If you ask questions, as she said earlier on, don't forget what she said earlier.
Anxieties around culture, people who simply don't like foreigners, don't like what they do to the country. Well, I don't think that we should entertain those views or treat them as legitimate.
Don't treat them as legitimate, eh? 25 and a half minutes it is past the hour. Dreadful thing, that dreadful thing. There would be no immigration, of course. Well, there might be some. As there wouldn't be thousands and thousands every day coming from Middle Eastern countries into Europe if MI6, if the CIA, the NSA, Mossad, the French intelligence agencies, and the Saudis weren't funneling arms and weaponry to some of the most lunatic, sick, monstrous bastards that ever walked the face of the earth, sending them into countries to turn peaceful countries like Syria, peaceful, prosperous countries like Syria, upside down and into some sort of, as I've said before, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome landscapes. Lunatic asylum. Those people who've never said boo to a goose all of a sudden are running for their lives into Europe. Nobody's any the wiser. If they listen to Sky or the BBC or anybody else, they're not any the wiser as to why you've got this increase in migration in recent years. So what do they do when they are confused? Well, they do one of two things. They jump into bed with social democrats and they scream, let them all in, let them all in, let them all in, which is fine. I mean, if we're going to bomb the shit out of their countries and cause chaos and carnage there, well, the least we can do is give them a house, right? Okay? Or they go to the far right, okay, the Tommy Robinson Brigade and that brigade, and they jump on that bandwagon and they start sharing stories about how migrants commit crimes and they race bait and they basically roll around in the mud, and that's how they act, and nobody, again, is any the wiser as to what's really going on. Madness. Dreadful. It's 27 and a half minutes past the hour. This is the Richie Allen Show. Let's have some Led Zeppelin. Why not, eh? Led Zeppelin. This is a song called Kashmir on the Richie Allen Show. It's Wednesday, October 23rd, 2019. I will have Stuart Waiton on the line in a couple of minutes' time. He'll be live from Abertay University in Dundee. Don't go anywhere. Led Zeppelin and Kashmir on the Richie Allen Show, 26 minutes to the top of the hour. Let's get into it then. This is serious stuff, this. Excuse me. This bloody head cold. We'll get over it. This is serious. It was in The Guardian this morning. To be honest, not as much take-up of this in UK media today, probably because of Brexit and because of the dreadful story about the 39 migrants who died in that lorry in Essex. So not as much take-up of this, but it's a big story. The Equality and Human Rights Commission, the EHRC, reported today by The Guardian that 29% of black students and 27% of Asian students have experienced racial harassment in UK universities. This is a report called Tackling Racial Harassment, Universities Challenged. And it highlights examples of anti-English sentiment too at Scottish and Welsh universities, but that hasn't gone down well. Heidi Mirza, a visiting professor of race, faith and culture at Goldsmiths University, said that including anti-British sentiment in the survey watered down the impact of racism on people of colour. I found that kind of startling, that figure of 29% of black students, 27% of Asian students, nearly a third then of black and Asian students saying they were racially harassed on campus. Could it be true? Well, my guest this hour is, well, he's no stranger to this type of story. He's no stranger to the programme either, and can be seen often on British television talking about these matters and matters of identity politics. He's an academic and author, and he's based at Abertay University in Dundee. It's a pleasure to welcome back to the programme Stuart Waiton. Stuart, thanks for taking a call out today, mate. I know you're busy. Thank you. This is, no better man than you to ask. Reading those figures, 29% of black students saying they've been harassed and 27% of Asian students, does that tally in any way with what you would hear with your ear on the ground in Dundee there in Scotland?
I could honestly say, hand on heart, I've been in this job for 12 years, and there has never been one single incident that I'm aware of, or that I experienced or heard in my class or came from my students, of any racism ever. I can honestly say that. Never have I heard of racism. I think part of the problem is, you look at this survey, it's a problem that these type of surveys seem almost designed to find a growing problem. It's very rare that you find a piece of research that says, of this kind, where it says racism is declining. But when you look at the major pieces of research by social attitude surveys, people like that, they say the complete opposite and say that Britain over the years has become more tolerant, less racist. In comparison to European countries, Britain does very well in terms of tolerance levels. Sometimes it's said to be one of the least racist countries, the most tolerant country. And yet you then find pieces of research like this come out, and other reports come out which seem to completely contradict that. So it's an interesting conundrum.
Yeah, it is. I've invited Professor Kehinde Andrews, who's mentioned in some of the articles today, to come on this programme in the past, and he's declined to come on. I think for the reason that I suppose he thinks that I've got a very definite or definitive point of view on this, which is a shame, really. I do, but let me be the devil's advocate then. Yeah. Maybe some black listeners to this programme, and I know I have some because of the tweets I get, maybe they say, the funny thing about this is, Richie and Stuart, it's often white guys like yourselves that discuss this, and you might be very well meaning and you might not see it anywhere, but maybe you're not best placed to make a judgment call on this and say that, the social attitude leans towards we're all, we're better than everybody else. Maybe we're not in a position, maybe we're completely oblivious to what's going on under our noses, and that's because of our own ethnicity. Now, that will be said. What do you say to that?
Well, that's fine. I mean, I think there's definitely some validity in that. It's, I'm not going to face racial harassment, although people could say anti-English stuff to me if they wanted to, then whatever, because I'm in Scotland. So I think that is an argument, but I think you can also say, well, nevertheless, I'm in a class with lots of students, regularly, and you'd think you might come across something, or I talk to my students, I know my students. In fact, tomorrow when I go in, I'm going to ask them. I'll ask the class. There's about 50 of them, and I'll ask them directly. Who's experienced racism and so on, and I'll report back at some point and let you know what they say. But you can also, I think, you can judge it by people's attitudes. So in class, you talk to students, and students are against racism. I mean, it's almost like a blanket thing, in terms of they're not. They're not, card-carrying racists. They're not, when you discuss issues about race, they're always sympathetic, and, it's just, it doesn't fit at all with what the normal student is. The normal student, the normal lecturer is a bit tilted to the left, into diversity, usually a bit environmentalist, it's just, it doesn't, so that entire framework, unless that's just completely a fantasy and, I'm just living in another planet, it doesn't really fit. So yes, I might not directly experience, but I experience lots and lots and lots of things at university, none of which suggests to me that racism is a kind of fervent issue and something that universities don't take seriously, which is what part of what the report said. And it's the opposite. Universities take race-related or what diversity issues and bullying, harassment. I mean, they take them incredibly seriously. They can't do enough to sort of have the next initiative and the new initiative to try and encourage diversity and so on. That doesn't mean there's no racism. It doesn't mean there's not a race. There's none of this happens. But you see, the interesting thing about the report, when you look at it, is that it conflates lots of things. I mean, there was a recent one out about the amount of sexism in universities, which apparently is like this huge amount of. And what they did in that research is they say harassment and rape, right? And they say the figures. There's 40% of women claim that they have been harassed or raped at a university. And you think, well, why are you lumping together harassment and rape, right? Rather than, how can you see these things as just, you can just lump that together.
Yeah, two different
and
things.
What do we mean by harassment? How broad a definition is it? And so this example on racism, they incorporate things like international students said they often felt unwelcome, isolated and vulnerable, treated like commodities, only wanted by universities for their fees. What's that got to do with racism?
Yeah.
I think, there's an argument there that, international students are cash cows and universities treat them as such. That's fine. That's an argument and a criticism. But what's that got to do with racism? And then you look down and they link name calling, physical attacks, and material by student societies that display something that people don't like. Again, you say, why physical attacks? If there are physical attacks taking place in universities, that is incredibly serious. And as far as I'm concerned, should be seen as much more serious than someone who does an insult or a joke that's unpleasant, which doesn't mean that that's right. But nevertheless, it's kind of, link it together. And then when it comes to the name, the insults, they make no distinction between serious insults. So, someone even says, so I'll just, a quote, says, "On multiple occasions, myself and my friends have had the N-word shouted at us, or being told they are, in speech marks, pretty for a black girl," right? Now, the last comment might be stupid, it might be naive, it might be racist, but that to me, again, seems quite different from someone using the N-word as an insult. And so you then get what's called microaggression, where insults that people don't necessarily mean as insults are incorporated into this discussion about racism. So it's very difficult to know what you're actually looking at to some extent.
You've touched on something which it made the basis for an article in the Telegraph. In fact, it was an academic writing in the Telegraph a week or so ago, and was a bit worried about this notion, this tendency towards, if the person perceived to be the victim is feeling these microaggressions or believes that he or she has been harassed, then they probably have. That's not a great road to go down, that. If somebody feels that something was meant by some gesture, well, then we should take that on board. That's not great, Stuart, is it?
No, it's not great at all. And we moved into an area, I've gotten to hot water about discussing this, but we're moving into an area, as far as I can see, where racism is actually declining, but sensitivity to racism, and especially language, is increasing exponentially.
While in society, we're seeing, I mean, you talked earlier on about people's, particularly younger people, 20-somethings, 30-somethings, working professionals, their tendency, and I'm talking about the white majority, in my experiences, and again, my black listeners, my black friends can say, "Richie, piss off." They can if they want, but my experience is that, there's a tendency towards white people to be sensitive about these things, to be leaning towards being more careful about what they say and what they do, and that would suggest to me that it's on the decline. And I've only ever tried to define racism. I found it difficult to define it anyway. My very, very not childish, but my very simple or simplistic definition is a pure racist is somebody who sees another race or another ethnic group as some sort of subspecies, lesser of a human being than them, less intelligent because of their racial background. To me, that's kind of racism at its purest. I've seen people over the years shout things at people in football matches, even on the pitch, but it was out of anger or to wind somebody up. I don't think it was because that footballer believed that black guy who's a good player was some sort of subspecies. My definition is very simplistic. You believe that another group of people is less worthy, less righteous, less human than you. Well, that's racism at its base. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you can also add to that, which then becomes a bit more interesting, I suppose, sociologically, is the idea that you can only have racism, right, as an ism, as a force in society, if you don't only have prejudice like what you've been describing, but you also have power, right? So, for example, I have a sort of a mind game for my students. I sometimes ask, where I say, if you had, lots of fans shouting racist stuff, say in the 1970s, right, and there's lots of them doing monkey chants and stuff.
Yeah.
I would say that what we're witnessing is racism. But if I saw an individual today doing something similar at a football match, you could argue that this is not racism. It might be a racist comment, but it's not racism necessarily. And the logic of that is because racism, as it was historically understood, especially by people on the left, was to do not just with prejudice, but also with power. So it meant powerful institutions and authorities used racism and denied people equal rights, the ability to work, housing, and so on, and they were policed unfairly, etc., etc. So racism as a force in society needs power as well as just prejudice. So today you can have an individual who might say something racist, but it doesn't reflect racism as a social force in society. And I think that's where we are. I think the institutions in society are not racist in general. Police, universities, and these other institutions.
Hang on, you say police now. Stuart Waiton is our guest, by the way, and if you haven't checked Stuart out before, I'll put links to his books. He's a very, very, very thought-provoking man. He's asking questions that very few people are asking in this day and age, sadly, and I'm not just saying that because he's here, so check him out if you haven't before. What about if me and you, and I will treat you to a pint sometime, sure of it, I'll be up there, or you'll be down. I owe you a few at this stage for coming on and giving us your time. But if we go out for a beer, two white lads, amiable enough, we might not, it's very unlikely we're going to get stopped. And the black listeners that do listen to this programme, and my black listeners, and I can name them, they're on Twitter right now, they don't appear to be very sensitive to these matters, but they will say, Richie, it's rotten to be getting stopped. You know, you're out with your family or you're out with your girlfriend or your boyfriend, you're dressed well, you've got a few bob in the wallet, you're going for a meal and you're stopped. I don't care what you say, Richie, to me that's fundamentally racist, or at least it shows there's something very wrong with policing. How do we address that?
It's a one I haven't fully resolved in my own head.
Yeah.
One of the arguments that's made, particularly about in London, which sounds kind of like it sounds glib, but apparently it's actually, research has been done into this and verified to a certain extent, which is the number of black people in London proportionately who actually are on the street, right? In terms of hanging outside shops and on estates and so on and so forth. There is a disproportionate number of black people who actually are in public space. And so the argument is that the reason that you get apparently disproportionate number of black people stopped and searched is because of that situation. And I know from my own experience when I've gone down to see my mate in Hackney and various places, it's often true that you can walk in an area. In fact, this happened to me. You walk down the street and everyone's black, or of an ethnic minority of some description, go to my friend's house and then go to the sort of trendy pub around the corner and everyone's white. And I said, well, where have they all come from?
Yeah.
Like, where have all these white young professionals come from? Because I don't see them on the street. I don't see any white people on the street. But everyone hanging around the shops and, who own the little shops and all the rest of it, they've all got an ethnic minority. So it's possible. And it's also possible that you have situations where, for historical reasons of racism, you have black people who had been ghettoized to a certain extent, and that's remained a problem. That past racism, where black people were dumped in certain areas and so on, means that you've got a relatively impoverished group or ghetto. It's not really a ghetto, but to a certain extent, poorer areas where you've got black people, and because of the nature of the area and the nature of life, there's more potential more criminality, and the police then get involved and so on. So there are arguments to try and look at beyond police racism, because you can be absolutely sure that the police are being educated to absolutely about being
fair,
conscious of diversity, conscious of race, conscious of not discriminating. But you may well still end up with some individuals in the police force who are racist and who target black people. You might end up with certain forces who, because of their experience of the young black kids who have resentment and so on, end up resenting those black kids, and you know what I mean. So
yeah, I get you. Yeah,
I think there's lots of aspects to it, but I don't think that this is a kind of policy where an institution is purposefully attempting to target black people. I think the police, it's the opposite to that. In fact, I think if you looked at police documents, police training and everything else, you would find the police are possibly, at least at that level, the most anti-racist organisation on the planet.
That might be controversial for some of our listeners, but it's good. He's speaking from the heart, Stuart Waiton. I've had two definite points of view expressed here by black listeners. One, Twitter from Jennifer. And Jennifer says, and I kind of admire this, although I should probably keep my own opinion out of it, but Jennifer says, look, the gist of it is, I'm nobody's victim. And I like that. And I think she'd be sympathetic to a lot of what you're saying. But I've also had an email from Alan. I've not heard from Alan before. Alan is black, he's in Wales. And he says that he's not oversensitive at all, but that there is something to white privilege. There is something. It is still more difficult for equally qualified black folks to get ahead than it is for equally qualified white folks, because there is still some undercurrent of suspicion in the country at large for people of colour or people of minority groups. And I've never been, God, I get hammered for some of the things that have happened on this programme. I'm not a virtue signaller. Maybe there's some truth to that. Maybe, he's saying I'm not, in any way sensitive, and I don't want to go down the white privilege route, but I'm convinced, he says, that the equally qualified folks, black and white guys going to get the job more often than not. Difficult to speculate on that. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the statistics on it as well as I should. I would suggest that when it comes to public institutions, that would be unlikely because they have such tight monitoring of numbers of people applying and so on. So in private businesses, it might be different. It might be that you still have people, especially older people perhaps, who've got prejudices, who limit the number of black people because of their prejudices. That is possible, and I don't have the statistics to suggest that, but to prove it one way or the other. But I mean, again, I go back to the statistics on tolerance in Britain in general. To the extent to which that is the case, is likely to be less the case today than it's ever been.
I want to just, before we wind up with one final question, I want to thank Stuart for coming back on the programme. This programme was featured regularly in recent weeks and months on the national press because of some of the interviewees that have been on in the past, people like David Duke and others who've got very strong and offensive opinions about Jewish people and stuff like that. Things I've never agreed with, and I've gone to great lengths to say I don't agree with them. And there was a bizarre incident actually where a great friend of mine, and I won't mention her by name, but people will know who I'm talking about, was asked by a newspaper, and I've known her for 12, nearly 14 years, why did you come on the programme? And in a bit of a panic, she said, I only heard of Richie Allen only a couple of weeks ago. And I asked her on the phone, why did you do that? And she said, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. It's just I got in a bit of a fluster. You don't want to be accused of racism these days. And I said, but nobody's racist here. You of all people. I mean, people will know who I'm talking about here. So, and you've had it. You've had it for speaking to people like me, and you dismiss it. And I think you told a reporter that if it's good enough for the BBC to interview people from the BNP and others, why shouldn't you speak to a presenter who has interviewed some offensive people in the past? And I don't want to be making a big thing of this, and it's not about me. I'm not important, and I've got very thick skin, and I'll just carry on making my programmes. But it's a worrying development, Stuart, isn't it? I mean, I've got a Jewish accountant and a Jewish friend who has made television programmes with me, and we talk about these things, and I say, what's going on? And he says, I don't know what's going on. I've got black colleagues and friends, and I say, what's going on? I don't know. And they all say, all of them, to a man and woman, whatever their background, whether it's black, Catholic, Jewish, whether they're a trans person or gay, they say, these are weird and fairly scary times that we're kind of moving into, where rather than like years ago, we said to somebody, you've got some fairly offensive things to say, let's get you onto a programme so we can challenge those things and find out. Now it's almost exile that guy to the furthest corners of the earth and anybody else who ever appeared on the same platform with him. What's going on, Stuart? And again, it's not about me. I'm a tiny example. It's happening to lots of people. What do you say to that?
Yeah, although I think it's entirely fine for you to make an issue of it, because it can destroy your career. It can destroy the potential for you to get people to come onto your show. You could be put out of what you're doing, and so can other people who are similarly accused of being racist or everything else. So I think it's entirely legitimate to make a big issue of things like this. I think on the issue of race, I always think it's best to start with most issues, actually, by looking at the elite, because they clearly, the people in authority positions of power, can have far more of a sort of significant impact on things in the media and everywhere else. And I think it was one of the equal opportunities bodies a few years ago described racism, which is interesting that they were conscious and were open about this. They described racism as a modern secular sin. And I think it's a very useful way to think about it, that this being against racism is today's sort of moral equivalent to being a good Christian.
Right.
And for the elite to show that they're against racism again and again and again and again becomes something of a necessity. Partly, I think, because they've got very little clarity about what it is they stand for. You can look at the nature of politics and the confusion of what do the political parties represent and so on. What do institutions represent? What inspires us about modern elites and institutions? And one of the things they feel very comfortable about is the issue of diversity and the issue of racism in particular. And I think because of that, it becomes an issue that's, I think you can boil it down to, it's almost like a constant moral panic, where the issue of race is something that is almost always going to be exaggerated and inflamed, because people almost need to show their outrage. Like the England football game and these incidents. There's outrage, and Boris Johnson feels the need. He must say his thing, and newspaper articles. There's reams and reams, and these kind of middle class interview people on Sky News and everywhere else are shocked. They're shocked. And this is surely any racism is not any insult, it's a kind of never ending. And they say things like it's not an isolated incident. You say, well, if you look at the figures, it's pretty isolated. But it doesn't matter. In fact, it wouldn't be a news story if it wasn't isolated, because it would just be happening all the time. But it's not. It's not happening all the time. It happens very occasionally. And then there's a huge issue made of it. So I think that it's something to do with the modern elite's need to have racism as a kind of moral crutch. And that then helps create the framework where sort of Twitter idiots feel this, I'm going to speak, it's outrage, this is the issue where you can express your outrage and just shout and scream and call people names and all the rest of it. And institutions then feel very defensive about defending people, very defensive about standing up against it, because it has become like this sort of, massive moral position that is absolutely unquestionable. And if you raise any questions about it, or you have people on your show who, are racist or
deemed to be,
dodgy views or whatever, then, that's you're like a blasphemer.
Yeah. Do you know, that's brilliantly put, and it's very deep stuff, that it is. And, I hope in the near future we'll get into it. Again, I just want to say on what we spoke about, I'm not kind of vulnerable to it. I've been around a long time. I've worked at every level of the business, commercially, nationally, and I'm thought of pretty fondly because I'm an amiable arsehole. I have foolish opinions and I say stupid things, but I'm an amiable guy, and I've got a lot of, credit in the bank, And I have contacted two organisations in particular, one being the so-called Campaign Against Anti-Semitism and the Jewish Chronicle, and I have warned them that if they ever again print anywhere that I promote Holocaust denial, I will sue them, and I will. So I'm in a fortunate position that I can do that. I'm not vulnerable. You know, I have interviewed people with opinions like those, and I've said I don't agree with you, and this is why I don't, and I've tried to find out why they think as they do. I won't tolerate people trying to, you know, kind of foist onto me this kind of guilt by association. It actually annoys me even more that they would do it to potential guests, which is something you alluded to. That really drives me mad. And you've got a great personality, because I was a bit sharp with you this morning in an email exchange. You're obviously up to your bloody tonsils as an academic and as a writer. And when you said you couldn't come on because of the stuff that's been in the papers, of course, I jumped the shark, as Irish people are prone to do. And I assumed that you were like, well, I'm not going on there again. And I should have known better. That's the only thing that would bother me. It wouldn't bother me what they say about me. I will deal with those people, and I will. And it's not cheap talk or tough talk here. It would annoy me that, a brain like yours, I love having you on because you've got a great mind. And some of the other people that come on have great minds. And the thought that they would say, well, for an easier life. And then, Stuart, just before we finish, and you can have the last word, then a part of me totally understands why an academic man or woman might say, Jesus, for an easier life, because we have bills to pay, we have children to feed, and if you can be destroyed by somebody because you appeared on a radio programme, well, then why appear on it? I'll give you the final word on that, and thanks for coming back today.
Well, I agree with you, and I think I'm glad that you sort of spat your dummy out a little bit. I think it's a dummy that is worth spitting, and I, if I was in your position, I would be very upset that people are trying to depict you in a certain way, because people try and depict me in a certain way. Yeah. And it's frustrating. I mean, and you have a point. I mean, one of my best colleagues at work, when he found out about, this idea, I've been on this radio show, and this radio show has had these dodgy people and all the rest of it. He said to me, just spontaneously said, you should be careful who you associate yourself with.
Right.
And I said, well, yeah, but this guy is an all right guy. He's not a racist. He's just has controversial people on his show. And as I said to you, on that basis, I shouldn't go on the BBC, because they've interviewed dodgy people as well. So
and
where do you end and what? So I should be held accountable for the fact that somebody has been on your radio show who's got dodgy views. I mean, what the hell's that got to do with me? It's completely irrational. I mean, it is McCarthyite,
It's mental, and to be fair, Peter Tatchell stood up to it. And I love Peter. I've had some rows with Peter about trans people over the years and other stuff like this. And Peter stood up to it, and I thought, fair play to you. And God love her, did and didn't. She didn't, and then she did. And I said, look, you of all people, don't bow down to that crap. You've been on with me since the mid-2000s. I'll interview these guys and I let them speak. Nick Collerstrom doesn't believe that the gas chambers existed, but who cares? I don't agree with that. I want to find out why, because he's not an evil man. Do you know what it is, Stuart, just before we finish? That's what it is, really. I said to one of the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism guys who wouldn't come on the programme to have a nice, relaxing chat with me, I said, this is what kills you. It kills you that I won't label these people as hateful, vile, monstrous scum. That's what you want me to do, but I won't, because they're human beings. Surely as a human being they have a right to be wrong.
Yeah.
And that's all I'll finish on saying on that. These are mad times.
Yeah. Well, I just want to throw one final thing in if I've got time.
You have.
Which is just to throw this in as an observation. What is very interesting about the issue of racism today. I mean, because the thing is, I'm reasonably confident about when people call me a racist or a fascist or even a white supremacist, which has happened this week, bizarrely.
Ridiculous.
Is that my past, I've been an active anti-racist, from the 1980s. So I'm fairly confident that it's, if they try and throw that sort of nonsense mud, it's not going to stick very easily. But the thing about the issue of racism today, which is kind of interesting and curious and worth thinking about, is it's almost all about language and the policing of language. And historically, racism was about structural issues, things like you don't get a job, you don't get a house, you're treated unequally, as you were saying. You've got a mindset that these people are less than equal, and they are treated less than equally, and that was the case in Britain in the 1970s and in the 1980s, and it quickly sort of like things changed in the 1990s very quickly. Today, almost all the stories that hit the headlines about racism are about words. Are about people saying things that are unpleasant. It's not about the powerful. It's not about structural issues. It's, apart from the one you mentioned about the police and stop and search, where there's a kind of question about that, and you're the guy who came on and said workplace is still a difference. But when you look at the news stories, they are almost all about language. They're almost all about the policing of language, and it's almost like a question of etiquette. So you've got the kind of moral dimension to it, and a question of what polite society has to be like. So, it's almost like, is it even, can you think about this as racism now as we might have done historically? Because it's really about insults and feelings, and, it's become something quite different.
It's brilliant. That's a great way to wrap it up. It won't be a popular opinion with some people, but I understand it, and I'd be very interested to hear what your students say to you when you ask them about it. And I know you'll ask follow-up questions, which maybe the survey didn't do maybe nearly enough. Stuart, thanks for coming back today, mate. It's great value. Great to have you on the programme, and continued success to you, my friend. Look forward to speaking to you in the future. Cheers, Stuart. That's the academic and author Stuart Waiton speaking to us live from Abertay University. He's written books on these subjects, lectured on them, written articles in the national press in Scotland. He's been on Sky News debating this stuff. It's very important stuff, and I'm glad he came back on the programme today. I did spit the dummy out of the pram a little bit this morning because I've had so much of it in the last couple of weeks. People saying to me, "Oh, I'm not coming on," and very sharply and very shortly. And one or two of them, when I've pressed them to maybe pick another day, and they've said, "Well, no, I won't be coming on." And it's driven me mad. And I do have a very thick skin. It doesn't affect me personally that much. It's more, I don't care what people say about me. I will take them on. You saw, anybody who watched what happened on Twitter that weekend back in May, I think it was, when you had people from all over the country and the world trying to destroy me. And paint me as some vicious, vile, Jew-hating person, trying to induce me to kill myself, putting my information in the public domain, my phone number, my address, I'll stand up to that. I'll deal with that. Face to face, I will deal with that if necessary. I'll deal with it in the courts if necessary. I don't mind it. That doesn't bother me. But what really pissed me off was people saying to me, "Yeah, I maybe should give your programme a wide berth." And I'm like, yeah, but you know that I don't agree with these people. I just don't hate them. I don't see them as bad people. I like Alison Shablow, but I'm not supposed to, because Alison says things that are supposed to be so hateful. Maybe they are, but I like her. I don't mind her. I don't agree with her, but I don't mind her. And I don't think that she should be sent to Coventry on a base level, or that she should be sent out to Tasmania to live out the rest of her life. So when people say, "Oh, I'd love to come on, Richie, but I better give it a miss," that really pisses me off. And fair play to Stuart Waiton, top man. Absolutely top man. This is U2 and Two Hearts Beat as One from 1983. This is before Bono went all mad. And it's from the War album. Meria Heller joins us live from Arizona in about 3 minutes' time. Meria is brilliant. Lots to talk about with her. Keep your tweets coming in at Richie Allen Show on Twitter. Two Hearts Beat as One from U2 on the Richie Allen Show, 13 and a half minutes past the hour. Welcome back to the programme. Loads of tweets on Stuart Waiton and our conversation a short time ago. Let's welcome back to the programme a proper legend. She's not if I said it, no, I'm not going to say it, she'd kill me for saying it. They refer to Ken Clarke in Westminster as the father of the house because he's been in the House of Commons longer than anybody else. Because Meria Heller has produced the longest running podcast on the internet, the first one. If I refer to her as the mother of the independent media, she'd probably kill me. But we'll welcome her back anyway. Meria.net, terrific broadcaster. Check her out if you haven't before. Welcome back, my friend. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back, Richie. It feels like 100 years, but I'm not insulted by that. Actually, Greg Palast said that I was the mother of internet radio.
Ah, so I'm in good company then. Yeah, I like Greg. Good stuff. Now tell me this and tell me lots. What about the prospect of Hillary Clinton joining the presidential race later on? We've been following with interest here some of the carry-on of this woman claiming that Tulsi Gabbard is a Russian agent and a Russian plant or a Russian asset, and seemingly everybody else in the Democratic Party. Is it beyond the bounds of possibility that she'll make a late run for the for the nomination?
My own opinion, you're asking my opinion, I would tell you no.
No way, you think? Why not?
No way. I just think she's over it. I mean, listen, everything she told us about Trump turned out to be true. And so, you can't argue her there. But, the other thing is, I think that she's the only one with any courage that's coming out against Trump or anybody else right now. Where are all the men? Where's Obama? Where's all the men in Congress? Where is everybody? Why is everybody so quiet while this guy is destroying the country? And listen, I don't like Hillary. You know that.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah.
To me, the choice they gave us in 2016 was like AIDS or cancer.
Yeah.
However, she's way, way leagues ahead of Trump, and even Tulsi Gabbard. Messing with Hillary with the experience she has and the things they've gotten away with their whole lives. She's just never gonna win it.
Just qualify that, because you said something there, and some of our listeners might take it the wrong way. You said she's leagues ahead of Trump. Her crimes and the crimes of her husband are.
Crimes are equal. Listen, the Trumps and the Clintons were always good friends.
Yeah.
Okay, and people need to remember that. Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, they both partied with Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah.
The Clintons were at Trump's wedding. So what we get here is, it's like the battle of the Titans, which one's worse than the other. But when I mean that she's leagues ahead, I'm talking about experience. Okay. Experience being questioned, being interviewed, whatever. Experience in politics. How else have the Clintons managed to keep themselves out of prison all these years?
Yeah, and that's a great point.
He's a new kid on the block, just like Tulsi Gabbard's a new kid on the block. And if she thinks she can equal, what's Hillary? She's got to be at least 70 years old.
You made a brilliant point there, Meria. You made a brilliant point there about Clinton's experience. I think that is what endeared Trump's supporters to him, or at least it was one of the things. They were endeared by this notion that he was apolitical, that he wasn't a political animal, that he was fresh, that he was, Donald, he was eccentric, that he wasn't tainted.
Right. They also believed he was a successful
businessman. Of course. But that was one of the things they thought. He's not part of the political class. Now, could that work for somebody like Gabbard, Tulsi Gabbard?
I don't think so. I think that, first of all, the very fact that Tulsi is so often on Tucker Carlson's show, it makes me question the whole deal with her. Changing positions, this, that, the other thing. As a woman looking at her, I just don't see any sincerity, even when she speaks. I just don't see any sincerity there.
You're going to want to kill me, by the way. I love this. We always find something to disagree with. That's why it's brilliant.
Well, I don't want to kill anybody. Listen, here's my thing. We've got, it's just like 2016. What did the Republicans have? 16 guys started out of the gate competing for the nomination.
Yeah.
And I said it on my show. I'm not going to start individually investigating these people until I see who gets the nomination, because otherwise it's just a waste of time. I think this whole story is just distraction. Why are we spending so much time on somebody that has less than 2%? So to me, it's the daily dog whistle. What people in America don't realize, especially Facebook, I'm going to single them out more than any other social media. Every day they have a new dog whistle for us. Here's what you're going to spend your day arguing with your fellow Americans over while we continue to screw the entire country.
What a powerful thing it is, though, eh? Oh, you saw through it. You talked to me about Facebook many years ago. Imagine if they get us all in the same place, using the same website. It won't be so easy to program And
right.
And you were spot on.
And, Zuckerberg is, continuously testifying. Now he said, he eliminated and found Russian, Iranian, people from South Africa throwing, their propaganda, their election propaganda on Facebook. They said they shut those accounts. But at the same time, Zuckerberg's taking $1 million a week from the Trump campaign to put all their crap on Facebook. So people have to realize Facebook is just Pavlov's bell.
Yeah.
And if you're going to react to it the way they want you to react to it by, fighting with each other, then they laugh all the way to the bank.
They certainly do. Now, I want to pick up on something else that you said. I love this. If you haven't heard the Meria Heller Show before, I'm sure you have, but if you haven't, check it out, meria.net. It's a terrific program. Speaking of experience, brilliantly experienced broadcaster, wonderful array of guests talking about, well, any topic, any subject you can care to think of. Loads of interest in this conversation. You and I, over the years, again, we would have talked about Sean Hannity, we would have talked about O'Reilly, we would have talked about you worked in radio, you worked everywhere, you understand what standards are, what ethics are in broadcasting. And these guys, of course, given oxygen by your man Roger Ailes, of course, given the oxygen to be vile, to be rotten, they were dreadful. Now, you didn't lump anybody in. You mentioned Tulsi going on Tucker Carlson. I don't mind Tucker Carlson. What I've seen from him in the last couple of years is I've seen a guy prepared to discuss things and to listen to opinions, Meria, that Fox News traditionally would never have allowed on their network. Now, I know he's got a past going way back before Fox, I'm well aware of it, but I see a guy there who's at least open to hearing from people that he would fundamentally disagree with, or am I wrong?
Listen, I try to avoid even the thought of watching Tucker Carlson. Just reading what he has to say shows me what he is. But if you really want to look at Fox News, here's a fun fact for your listening audience. Fox News, big part of the ownership of Fox News is Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
So people don't want to understand, the news we're getting is all propaganda and it's all whistleblowing. Okay. And, when you want to look at Fox News, Hannity, the rest of them, they're not journalists by any means. They're just, talking heads. Who cares about their opinions? You know what they say. Opinions are like assholes. Everybody has one. But when you want to really look at, they had a real journalist, actually the only one I actually would watch, Shepard Smith, who actually talked about facts, who took on Trump. And Trump sent his henchman, William Barr, cover-up Barr, over to Fox News. And 2 days later, Shep Smith was gone. And even though Shep Smith said, all of a sudden he wanted to retire, the guy was in the middle of a very lucrative contract. So, if you argue against and you're not kissing Trump's butt on Fox News, your job's in jeopardy. And now Trump is going after Chris Wallace for doing the same thing, for calling out the liars in his administration like Mick Mulvaney.
And it's a scary thing if any elected official anywhere can influence a network to get somebody moved on. And I know there is a lot of merit to the story about Trump and Shepard Smith. Otherwise, I'd be jumping on you, asking you for proof. I know there's a lot of merit to that story. I would say about Carlson, just finally, not to waste our time on him, I would say that the guy is patently and definitely against the US presence in not only in the Middle East but anywhere else. And that's a total departure from most of Fox News. I know Shepard Smith was different. I would beseech you, my friend, my great friend, to, whenever you can stomach it, give him a week and then come back to me and say, give him a week, because he's interviewing people again that Fox would never have tolerated. And some people have said he's a kind of a conspiracy theorist because he's segueing into certain issues that we would cover on our programs, but nobody else in the mainstream media would touch. And I wonder about that. But look, maybe...
the other day I covered on my show, because of this whole dog whistle about Tulsi Gabbard,
yeah.
I'm like, She's one of at least 6 people that shouldn't even be on the stage, in my opinion, because it's just confusing and the debates are a joke. They're
Who is this woman, Meria? Give our listeners a flavour, because we here in the UK, what we get is that this is a good woman, a former military woman who is anti-war as anti-war can be. She'd be as anti-war as Bernie Sanders. She would be against what's happening in Venezuela. US interference there, brilliant. She seems to say all the right things. So who is this woman?
Well, it's a good question. So it was, I covered it on my show. More work than I wanted to do looking into her background, okay? Because to me, that was a waste of time because she's going nowhere. But my father always taught me one thing, Richie. He said, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And I'm sure that's not a new expression to you. So I did a little investigating into her because of all the dog whistling going on Facebook. And her father is one of the most anti-gay people going. He's into several anti-gay, fake religious groups. He also, and with her help, while she was in the Senate in Hawaii, passed a bill outlawing gay marriage. Tulsi also was raised the same. Okay.
Right.
Listen, I was raised in my father's religion and I believed it well into almost 30 years old.
Yeah, but what does she believe now, though? Would she be against gay marriage?
Listen, all politicians. Oh, I said that then, but I didn't really mean it. I've changed my mind. I grew. I've heard this from every politician in this country, whether it's the ones caught with blackface, whether it's the rapists, the pedophiles, the drunks that sit on the Supreme Court. That was then, this is now. But, my mother also had an expression, leopards never change their spots.
Yeah.
So, I don't really know what the deal is. All I know is that we are becoming a third world country at the speed of light here in America. I don't know if you saw that rolling blackout they had in California on the possibility that there would be a fire. And PG&E couldn't, they didn't want to pay any lawsuits. So they said, well, we'll just put California in the dark. Lots of people died. People that were on, life support, oxygen, whatever at home.
Is that true?
And now they're saying California can look forward to this for at least the next 10 years.
That is extraordinary.
My opinion on that, the first thing I thought when I saw that, Richie, was the Boston bombings. Okay, when we had the Boston bombings, that was a good exercise in shutting down everybody's phones. Because remember, when they shut down your phone, you can't take pictures. And that's where the term and the other thing, shelter in place, began. So when I look at they're telling California this, well, it's just a matter of time before the rest of the country is going to suffer the same fate.
Let me ask you this. Our guest this hour is Meria Heller, Meria.net. Check her out if you haven't before. Loads of interest in this. Hi to William in Scotland, who says, I love Meria. I could listen to her all night long. Speaks so much sense, in depth, and on numerous subjects. You smoothie, you, William. Yeah, she is good.
Well, William, come over to my site. I have about 700 hours of shows, and you literally can listen all night.
Going back to when Moses was in short trousers.
Right. I feel like I've been doing this since I fell out of my mother.
But yeah, it's a lovely comment from William. Hi to Patricia as well, mutual friend of ours, Patricia in Switzerland, of course, in Zurich there. She agrees with you on Tucker Carlson there. She also says, yeah, Hillary does know what it means to actually govern, unlike Trump. Again, she wouldn't be any fan of Hillary Clinton. Here's the question. I've had a number of people on the programme who believe that these wildfires in California are not what they appear to be. What do you think?
I totally agree.
What's
totally
happening?
Agree. I've covered it on my show. I mean, the ones they had last year absolutely looked like directed energy weapons. I mean, you'd have to be blind not to see that. And, what's interesting is when these fires happen where the multi-million-dollar homes are, they manage to keep the fire at bay. But when it's where regular people live or it's land they might want for other alternative purposes, all of a sudden, everything is, blazing like nobody's business. When I saw the pictures of the fire damage, especially that one town that was totally wiped out, of course it looked like a directed energy weapon because the pictures were very similar to the pictures in Judy Wood's book on Where Did the Towers Go?
What about, just before you carry on there,
sure.
I'll have some listeners, and you have them as well, skeptics. which is good. It's nice that people who disagree will actually listen, and they won't be snowflakes, and they'll actually listen. What about the skeptics who say, Jesus, Meria, come on, directed energy weapons, what are you bloody talking about? Star Wars? George Lucas? What are these things? I've never seen one. What are these weapons?
Well, I mean, all they have to do is even just go to a protest. Could go to a protest and see what happens when they use a microwave weapon on you. Okay, and your skin starts burning and you fall to the ground, or sound weapons that they have where, you go deaf and fall to the ground. These were weapons that they said were only going to be used in other countries until, of course, they used them here on American citizens. But, if anybody till today actually believes that the Trade Center was taken down by 2 airplanes, they haven't done any homework whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they do.
As a matter of fact, another story that doesn't get any coverage, and it's crazy. Of course, I cover it. The Firefighters Association in New York have now reopened the investigation into 9/11 because they believe those buildings were taken down by controlled demolition.
That's right, and we spoke with Richard Gage. I know you know Richard very well. Spoke with Richard.
Yeah, I opened for Rich when he was in Scottsdale.
That's right. You're a friend of Richard's, and the last time he was on the programme, actually, a couple of months back, we talked about that. Again, no media coverage of that. What a monumental story that is, and yet nothing about it outside of the independent media.
Well, here's the thing. It just proved me right 20 years ago, or when, approximately when 9/11 happened. There was a little fascistic patriotic newspaper that somebody sent me. I don't remember the name of it. But the article in the newspaper was all about the construction of the Trade Center. And at the time, the architects that sat together said, well, in about 10, 20 years, these buildings are going to be obsolete. What do we do when we have to take them down? Because we don't want to take out half of Lower Manhattan. So they supposedly built that with the potential, I don't know what you would call it, but where all they would have to do is place the explosives on the wiring. It was already pre-wired for explosive takedowns. Now, when I repeated that story on my show, everybody laughed at me, but the firemen in New York are not laughing anymore. So I was like, wow, that one crazy article in that newspaper looks like it's proven to be true.
Yeah, you were on the 9/11 thing from day one, weren't you? I mean, that's
more than I wanted to be.
Yeah.
More than I wanted to be. But, as I told people, when I did see the buildings come down, I was married to an architect. So, when he was going to school, he would bring home lots of videos on controlled demolition. And they were enjoyable to watch because, you knew they were deliberately taking those buildings down. So for me, when I saw the video on TV, immediately I knew it was a controlled demolition because I had seen tens of hours of controlled demolitions.
Light bulb went off over your head. Donald Trump, who saw plenty of demolitions as well before he built these worthless hotels, he said the same thing, didn't he? Trump said the same thing, whatever Trump is, and we know what he is. Trump did say very, very early on, it looked like one of those controlled demolitions to me.
Well, yeah, but you know what? Sadly, he convinced a lot of people in the movement and a lot of people I used to respect to vote for him because he promised to reopen 9/11. Yeah. I told even my 9/11 experts, I said, you're kidding me, right? You don't really believe he's going to do that. We still don't even have the papers from the Kennedy assassination from him.
Yeah.
But everybody fell for it. Listen, this guy is a snake oil salesman. He'll tell you anything you want to hear and fulfill none of it.
He reminds me, and I did a little video that, most of what I do is just laughable in terms of I do some YouTube stuff just to make people laugh. But I did a serious video a couple of years ago about the film Casino made by Martin Scorsese. And I used the film as an analogy of the Trump administration. And Donald Trump is basically Philip Green, the little geeky guy that gets the big check from the Teamsters to build a casino. He's just a front man for gangsters. That's all he is. That's all he ever was, and I totally agree.
Boy, I think you're talking about Mo Green, right?
No. You're thinking of Mo Green from The Godfather. No, but in Casino, the guy's name was Philip Green. Let me ask you this, going back to the fires, because the fires in California is so massive. Accepting that there is a lot of evidence around the fires being set deliberately using directed energy weapons and maybe other means.
Yeah, and I'm not saying all of them.
I know you're not. I know.
Just jerks who have nothing else to do but start fires. But there's also the Pacific Gas and Electric, They know how antiquated their infrastructure is. They have refused to put their wires underground. And to them, the solution is let's just cut off everybody's electricity just in case we have a fire so we don't have to pay any lawsuits. And people in America have to understand our lives mean nothing in a capitalistic society. It's all about the bottom line, or we would have a decent medical system, which we don't.
We are expendable, and you and I both know this. You've known it for longer than I know it, but we are expendable. Now, if directed energy weapons are being used by some shadowy elite, and I think there's a possibility, what's the end game? Why do they want to burn all of that wonderful countryside, all of those hills? Why are they doing it?
Well, listen, I might be super paranoid, but looking at all the lawsuits that Trump has filed against California, knowing how much he hates California and everybody in it, it wouldn't even surprise me if he or his people are connected to that. But, here in the United States, you have to think about Michael Murphy's movie, Why in the World Are They Spraying?
Yeah.
These corporate conglomerates, they'll do whatever it takes and make it pose as a natural disaster to be able to just steal your land. Okay. The market is also based on that. So, it could be a million different things. But, the unfortunate thing is the people in California are trapped.
They're trapped in the middle of it. Now, if it is, again, some shadowy elite that wants to do it to get people off the land, to take control of that land. Again, being the devil's advocate, but I do kind of think this would be way above Trump's pay grade. He wouldn't have anything to do with it personally. Maybe the people above him.
He totally detests the politics and the shit coming at him from California. I mean, it's every day there's new lawsuits. It's just ridiculous. I can barely keep up. But
this is news. Hang on, Meria. Sorry.
Who was it? Webster Tarpley that came up with the acronym, made it happen on purpose. MIHOP, or I forget the other one. But who knows? I just don't put it past. I couldn't believe Trump would even have the nerve to go to California to fundraise, but he did. Italians, we would say he has a hard face. He goes where he's not wanted. He gets into a big fight with a mayor in Minneapolis because he had the nerve to ask for payment before one of his Hitler rallies. Because he knows Trump is stiffing people all over the country. He still owes Texas over $800,000.
These are fascinating subjects. They segue. We go from one into another. I want to talk about Jeffrey Epstein with Meria, because obviously this week. So I don't know whether you saw it, but Channel 4 in the UK, it runs a program called Dispatches, which is basically, say it for me, it's like a documentary, and it deals with very, very different subjects. And they got into the Jeffrey Epstein story and his relationship with Prince Andrew, and allegations about Andrew, the Prince, the Queen's son, being with Epstein in orgies with young girls present and all of that. What do you think about the legacy of the very strange death of Jeffrey Epstein? None of us believe that he committed suicide in the manner he's supposed to have. But it seems that some news agencies won't let it go, and that's not a bad thing. How are you reading this?
No, it's not a story that should be let go. First of all, I'm not convinced that he's dead. Okay. There were people that took the pictures apart of the supposed body that they took out of the prison. He's not in an orange jumpsuit. His head's not covered. Well, they always cover a dead person's head with a sheet in America. I wouldn't be surprised if he's sitting on an island with Ken Lay, Saddam Hussein, and Osama bin Laden. I think I was reading, I'm trying to think on what site it was, where people have connected Epstein to being a Mossad agent. Epstein was connected to a lot of these secret societies, so he had a ton of information on a lot of people. Luckily, there's still, people talking about it, because in America, every day is a new distraction from the latest horrific news. But one girl said that there's over 1,000 people named in the lawsuit against Epstein. You can bet your bippy that the Clintons and the Trumps are on that list.
And it's nice to come around to that again for any snowflakey type people who heard Meria criticise Trump and thinks that she's a supporter of Hillary Clinton. Sadly, we're not all mature enough to accept that just because you dislike one person doesn't mean that you automatically like another person.
Listen, I disliked Trump long before he was president. Don't forget, I grew up in New York, one borough away, and he's only 3 years older than me. So New Yorkers have always known what he is.
He's always been a fraud, hasn't he? A gangster, a shyster, but he's gotten away with it.
Which mayor it was? It could have been Koch. I don't remember. But he said he wouldn't believe a word out of Trump's mouth if his tongue was notarized. So, New York didn't give him an easy time. And New York is still not giving him an easy time, because I read this morning that Trump is taking his name off the ice skating rinks in Manhattan because he knows the name is hurting the business. But nobody even wants his name on their buildings anymore, except maybe Turkey, which is probably the card they're holding over his head.
This is what pisses me off. Before we talk more about Epstein and what might happen, what really pisses, there were some very good tweets last week by some fairly well-known film stars, because it's popular amongst Hollywood people to be very much anti-Trump. That's fine. There are a million reasons why you should be annoyed with Donald Trump, Robert De Niro and others, of course. But what I really liked was when the guy who played the Hulk most recently, who was a good actor, I can't think of his name now, but he played the Hulk. He's in the Avengers movies playing the Hulk. He was going on and on about how much of an arsehole Trump is. But it was pointed out to him on Twitter by a number of people that he was a big supporter of Barack Obama, who turned out to be the greatest Trojan horse of all time. You know, change has come to America. No, it hasn't. Done nothing for African Americans. Dropped more bombs on average than George W. Bush, another useful idiot. And I think it's important to note that a lot of this Trump hating is fine. And I'm not accusing you of it now. I'm not, Meria, but I'm talking about celebrity film stars and stuff like that. It's all very well and good, but they've got a selective memory.
Oh, it seems to be everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody has this delay. Look at Lindsey Graham. Okay, look at Mitch McConnell. If it wasn't for video of these people that was shot 20, 30 years ago, you wouldn't be able to see how two-faced, hypocritical they are now. And these people forget everything they ever said or did is either on video, audio, or in print. Once the internet rolled around, there was no getting rid of something you said. I'm going to call that back. I'm going to walk that back. Here you have, let's just take Mulvaney for an example. He openly admits in an interview of quid pro quo, and the next day he tried to walk it back. So, we are ruled by, and you know what, I don't care what country you're living in, we are ruled by the worst people among us. Imaginable.
You're absolutely right. Listen, because we jump back and forwards between topics. Going back to Tulsi Gabbard, Graham Booth, who's a friend of ours, Graham works on triggerwarning.tv. It's a news platform here in the UK, which is excellent. And that's right. It's a very good name. The lads would take different positions on issues than maybe you and I would, but they're open to listening to people who disagree with them. They're good lads and they're very funny lads. Graham got on to me this morning to say there's an excellent bit of information out there that shows that Google has been removing search results about Tulsi Gabbard in the United States. Google has. And that would suggest that Google at least might be a bit worried about the popularity of Tulsi Gabbard. Now, I heard you loud and clear when you said to me earlier on, maybe we shouldn't get too excited about this woman. But it seems that she's having a bit of interference there. A guy called Crowder has made a video that does have some compelling evidence in there that Google doesn't like this woman particularly.
Well, listen, from what I've read, and I'm here in the United States, the name Tulsi Gabbard's been Googled more than any other name right after the last trigger. We'll call it trigger. I like that. I'm going to use this word.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, listen, you got Google, you got YouTube, you got, all the rest of them. They're all owned and controlled by the same ugly octopus that's controlling the entire world. If people think any of these sites are there for we the people, you can forget about it. It's there for we will manipulate your mind.
We'll find out what you want to hear, and we'll give it to you in spades.
Right, until they've convinced everybody to put a chip or a computer chip in their brain, this is the way they do it.
And of course, Elon Musk is about ready, isn't he, to start putting chips in people's brains?
Yeah, I think he should start with himself.
Absolutely.
And then fire himself off into outer space.
How terrifying is that reality, that you and I both know that when the chip becomes available, and it will be within the next 18 months to 2 years, and they say to people, hey, listen, because we see those absolutely embarrassing queues, don't we, around the Apple stores for 4 days. People camping out to get the new iPhone. These people are crazy. God love them. We should maybe sympathise with them. So when the chip comes out, they're going to queue for it, Meria.
Well, listen, I've talked to young people who can't wait. They can't wait. And I have to educate them of why they should wait. But, you got to remember the way they market this stuff, it's always for your convenience.
Oh, yeah.
You won't even need your iPhone. You won't need a computer. Okay. We'll just massively control your minds. And for young people, they think this is great. Look, I can give you an example. I remember a while back when I was living in the Valley, I walked into my gym and the kid said, we're going to just take fingerprints now. You don't have to use your card.
Right.
And I was like, who the hell are you, Interpol? That's what I told him.
But absolutely crazy, right? I mean, we don't need, yeah.
But then I went on such a rant, and he said, we knew you would have a problem with this.
We knew you.
Keep using your card.
Right.
Well, it was probably about 10 o'clock at night, and I decided to go interview the people that were in the gym to ask their opinions on this convenience of giving them their fingerprint. And believe it or not, most of the young people said, sometimes I forget my card. This is so much easier. And then I came across a black kid. And he said the same thing. This is so convenient. It's great. And I said to him, you're a black man in Arizona. They have your fingerprints. If a crime happens within, say, 10, 20 blocks of here, who do you think they're going to come looking for?
What did he say?
Literally the color drained out of his face.
Yeah.
So I only have one guy left in the whole gym, right? And I went up to him and I said, what do you think about the fingerprint deal at the front desk? And this kid looked at me and he started screaming like I do. And then he looked at me and he says, you're Meria Heller.
Right.
And I realized that there was one person awake in that gym. Everybody else was already going for the convenience factor.
There's a brilliant woman called Pippa King, English woman, whom runs a website called Biometrics in Schools. And not many years ago, but some years ago, they wanted Pippa's children to use their fingerprints to pay for food in the cafeteria, in the lunchroom. And Pippa, being wide awake to what's going on, said no way. And prevented it. Yeah, these are mad times.
I was like, who are you, Interpol? I said, I've lived 60 years without giving anybody my fingerprints. Why the hell would I give it to you?
And now they're using them on their phones to access their phones. They're using them to pay.
Well, that's another thing for your convenience. It's like convenience comes before the slaughter.
And that segues into the cashless society. I mean, it must drive you bloody mad when and I can imagine you pulling up to a petrol station or a gas station, as you say, over there, and you're getting ready to pay, and you've got the kids paying with their mobile phones. They touch their phones to the contactless. They have no idea how bad that is.
They have no idea at the end of the month how much money they spent either.
Haven't a clue, do they?
They just think it's a magic phone that just gives them free money. Because I've seen it. I've seen it sometimes with my own grandchildren. And I'm like, you got to pay those bills. It's not like free money flying through your phone.
And you know what? You're right about getting into debt. That's an issue. But do you think that one of the other issues is this is going to a future social crediting system? Because when there is no cash...
Look, they already have it in China.
In China.
And, I forget the author at technocracy.com. I think it's Ed Griffin. He's made it very clear that this is where they're going.
I mean, can you imagine in a few years' time, hey, Heller, we heard your radio show, we don't like what you've been saying. You can't access your account for a week. That's what's coming down the line.
Well, they have planned to institute that here too. You know, when I don't know if you get to see the show Black Mirror.
Yeah.
There.
It's made in
but
the UK.
I mean, they had an episode, just on that, and then boom, China rolled it out. There are people in China that can't fly, they can't get on a train. It's all because their social rating, not even their social credit score.
You were a bad person today.
Exactly. So this is like, it's like some futuristic movie where, if you don't toe the line, you don't exist.
Yeah. You're gone.
And people need to wake up. Yesterday, I made the comparison. Trump here in America, he's on television 24 hours a day. I mean, literally, you can't escape him. Okay. And all I could think of is in the book 1984. Where you have the leader on that giant TV, wherever you are.
The Ministry of Information, yeah, that's the one.
Exactly. But, for me, he's getting free advertisement. He gets free advertisement. He's always working in some ad for his hospitality business. I guess his idea of hospitality is children in cages. And I'm sick of seeing him. And then, listen, Obama, was no saint either, but I remember when the mainstream media wouldn't even cover his speeches unless he paid. So why is this guy getting free coverage 24/7? These are questions Americans should be asking themselves. They should be afraid, but they're not.
No, they're not. I think worse than that, they're still mentally attached like an umbilical cord, kind of, not mentally, but an umbilical cord to the system, to the belief that they can get it right next time. Next time we can vote somebody, and they can't. There is no next time.
Right. Well, it's like the ridiculous belief most Americans are raised believing that anybody can become a millionaire and anybody can become president.
Yeah, nonsense.
Well, you have to be a millionaire to be president. You know what I mean?
You have to be a billionaire to be
president. People want
president.
to continue to believe in the myth. Listen, I have covered stolen elections that can go all the way back to Lyndon Johnson. And people still want to believe we're going to change this with our vote. If that was the case, most of these people in Congress would not have their seats because they all are in, single digits as far as approval. And yet they always seem to get reelected. And, whether it's, vote scam, whether it's the best democracy money can buy, whether it's code red, the facts are out there, but people still want to believe that their vote matters.
Is it because life, I said this morning on I do a live stream early in the mornings. Is it because life is that difficult now for people? They really are consumed by managing to get to the end of the week or the month. So they can't contemplate any of this.
Well, I think that's part of it. I mean, we've been systematically dumbed down through our food, through the chemtrails, to the fluoride in our water, prescription drugs. I mean, the list goes on and on. But I think that people are very lazy and don't want to do the homework. They'd rather listen to some talking head telling them how to think. I had just put the information out there, and I always remind my audience, you do with this information whatever you want. And if you want to research it, you want to vote for Tulsi, you want to vote for whoever. I mean, but understand this, he who counts the votes wins. And our vote is always counted in secret.
In secret. And ultimately, the banksters have said since time immemorial, we don't care who you vote for, because so long as we create the money, it doesn't matter a damn who sits on Parliament.
They never lose. They pick out who's going to wear the suit on both sides.
On both sides. Meria, it's brilliant having you on this program. The reaction I get on Twitter is absolutely terrific. Always is. Challenging people's thinking. That's what it's all about. I really appreciate it. You know that. If you haven't checked out Meria's website before, it is meria.net, meria.net. There are, as she said, 700 hours of interviews with terrific men and women with alternate philosophies and points of view and alternate analysis of current events and historical events. It's a brilliant archive I think it's unparalleled. It's unmatched anywhere. Great to have you back on. I'll give you the final word, and I think next time we speak, I'll be on the Meria Heller Show. I look forward to that. Giving you the Brexit report.
Well, thank you for that, Richie. And all I'm going to ask your audience to do is do some homework on your own, okay? And just think, okay? Think. Stop giving your power away to these people because they're draining us. They're draining us on every level. They're feeders. And just do the best you can to enjoy your day every day.
Yeah, too right. That's a good point as well. Disconnect sometimes from it. Get out and about. Get a bit of fresh air if there isn't any spraying going on.
Right.
Do spend time in woodland areas and near water features because it really is good for you and it kind of balances you out a bit. I totally agree with that. Listen, just carry on doing what it is you do. Terrific stuff, Meria. And we'll speak again real soon. Thanks for your help and enjoy the rest of your day there in the lovely Arizona. Thanks again, Meria.
You're welcome. You take care, Richie.
Brilliant lady, Meria Heller, Meria.net, Meria.net, live on the line to us there from Arizona. Thought-provoking stuff as always. Big shout out to Meria there. Right, that's about it for the programme today. I do believe tomorrow Caroline Farrow will be on the programme. I'm looking forward to speaking with Caroline. Caroline is a Catholic lady, I do believe, and she came to national, she might not be a Catholic, she's a Christian lady anyway, came to national media attention in this country talking about the trans issue, which covers a lot, doesn't it, the trans issue. She's got a case going on at the moment. We won't talk about the case because we can't. It would be difficult for her to do that. But we will talk about these issues of trans rights with her, but also rights around freedom of religious expression in the UK and much more besides. She's agreed to come on the programme tomorrow as Caroline. She's the campaign director for Citizen Go here in the UK. I know there's supposed to be a phone-in tomorrow, but this is so important. I think we might do the phone-in on Monday or Tuesday of next week. We can be fluid, not gender fluid, not gender fluid, but we can be fluid in our approach to radio. It's just you and me, you see. We can do whatever we want. There's no Ofcom. There's no bosses. There's no head of programmes. We can do whatever the bloody hell we want. Listen, speaking of programmes, do go to triggerwarning.tv, the website. Look for Trigger Warning on YouTube and do check out the lovely, the curvy, the curvaceous Graham Booth and Hayden Hewitt. Two very smart and very funny guys. They will say lots of things that you don't like. That's the essence of Trigger Warning. But they've got some very prescient programmes and subjects. And again, thought-provoking stuff. Do check them out. I do myself. I wouldn't recommend it if it wasn't any good. Closing out with the Smiths, Manchester's finest. This is I Started Something I Couldn't Finish. Yeah. Good night. Look after yourselves and one another. Speak to you tomorrow.